I'm going to go over a time path, and it's a major time path. There are several major time paths that point to the year 2033 AD. And it's why we say that there's much biblical evidence pointing to that particular year. And I've talked about some of that evidence before. One quick example would be from 33 AD to 2033 AD is 2,000 years exactly. That's a major time path. And there are several of them. There are 30-some or 40 overall time paths that point to the year 2033. And some of them are just from dates of major biblical events that break down to significant numbers, and yet it's not as major as exactly 2,000 years, or from the foundation of the temple in 967 BC to 2033, exactly 3,000 years. They seem to be really strong. Well, I was just thinking of this other time path, and first of all, I want to remind us of the length of the church age. From 33 AD, when the church age began on the day of Pentecost, until the year 1988 was 1,955 years. And 1,955, when we break that number down, breaks down to 5 times 17 times 23. Equals 1,955 years. Each of those numbers are very significant. 5 having to do with the atonement, 17 with heaven, and in this case, it would be the salvation of the first fruits, all who were saved over the course of the church ages, 1,955 years, guaranteed to be brought to heaven, number 17, times 23, because it's judgment. And in 1988 was the 13,000th year of Earth's history, and a 23-year judgment began on the churches and congregations. So each of those numbers are very key and significant numbers. Well, there's another interesting date, and it's the date when Jacob entered into Egypt. It was the year 1877 BC. And Jacob entered in, we know the famine had already been 2 years in the land. During the 7-year famine, so the famine began in 1879. 2 years later, in 1877, Jacob and his family found out that Joseph revealed himself to his brethren, and Joseph a type of Christ. Just as the Lord Jesus revealed himself to the elect, who Jacob and his family typify in the churches as they were in the land of Canaan, during the time of Great Tribulation. And the 7-year famine in the book of Acts is called Great Tribulation, Great Affliction. But the two words, the Greek words, are Great Tribulation, just as in Matthew 24. So Joseph reveals himself to his brethren, which starts the chain of events that eventually lead to Jacob and his family leaving Canaan and entering into the land of Egypt. Just as the Lord Jesus revealed himself no longer to be in the church, but to be out in the world. Or it was a discovery God's people made, as the Lord revealed, that Christ was operating outside the churches, and Egypt typified the world outside the churches. Very amazing spiritual parallel that God established. And so Jacob entered into Egypt in 1877, and if you remember, he was brought before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asked him how old he was. In Genesis 47, verse 8, and Pharaoh said unto Jacob, How old art thou? And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of their pilgrimage. 130. And it just so happens that after 1955 years of the church age, in the year 1988, it was exactly the 13,000th year of Earth's history. And we can see the similarity once you break a number down. The 13,000 breaks down to 10 times 10, which is 100, times 10, which is 1,000, times 13. So 10 times 10 times 10 times 13. Jacob was 130 which is 10 times 13, the same two numbers. Of course, 1,000 has more tens, but it doesn't change the spiritual meaning of those two numbers. There's a greater emphasis with the number 1,000, but it's still the emphasis on 10 completeness, 13 superfullness, or the end of the world. And so in 1877, there is a relationship because of Jacob's age, because it's the time of Great Tribulation. That famine is called Great Tribulation, with the year 1988, wherein the Great Tribulation began, and it was the 13,000th year of Earth's history. There's an unmistakable relationship between the two. So here's where the time path comes in. We know the church age was 1955 years. Well, from 1877 until 2033 AD is 3,910 calendar years. And 3,910 breaks down to 2 times 5 times 17 times 23. It is the same numbers, 5 times 17 times 23, that 1955 breaks down to. Or we could say it another way. From 1877 BC until the year 2033 AD is 2 times 1955 years. 2 times 1955 years. And we get to the year 2033, and so there's an emphasis on 5 atonement, 17, the number of heaven. It's our expectation, according to the biblical evidence, will bring God's elect into heaven, and 23, judgment, as 2033 concludes another tribulation, the second tribulation, the recompense of tribulation that began in 2011, and 2033 is the 23rd inclusive year of that tribulation or judgment on the world. So we really have an amazing time path that doubles the duration of the church age and falls on the year 2033.